I am so happy to welcome all of you to our service today. This is the Unitarian Universalist Church of Bowling Green, and whether you're in person, we're so happy to see you, or whether you're joining us on online, we are so glad that you're joining us. And just as a reminder, those of you who are here, those of you at home don't have to worry about this, but the rest of us have to shut off our cell phones. So if you haven't done that, please do that now. We are a welcoming community, whoever you are, however you identify, wherever you come from, and whoever you love, you are welcome here. Our Sunday services are different each week so that we can honor and learn from a wide array of traditions and beliefs. And today, our speaker is Russ Funk. I'll tell you a little bit more about Russ a little bit later. And he will actually also be leading us into meditation before he speaks to us today. And though we walk our own path here in this place on the land of the Osage and the Cherokee and the Shawnee, and now at this time we journey together as one community. And now at this time, Jeff Strong is going to light our chalice, and I'm sorry that our props didn't work today, so. There we go. As our congregation's chalice is lit, please light your own chalices at home if you have one. And please join us in singing hymn number 362, Rise Up, O Flame, the Birds Are Here. Today, our opening words are going to be done by our Natalie Barman, who will be speaking to us, and she will be telling us all about mothers and mother figures.
For All the Mothers and Mother Figures by Linda Sue Ulrich. For all the mothers and mother figures, the grandmothers, aunts, and extended family members who mother, the soon-to-be mothers, the wish they were mothers, the never wanted to be mothers, and its complicated mothers. The birth mothers, foster mothers, adoptive mothers, and stepmothers. The used-to-be dad mothers, and more than one mom mothers. The single mothers, separated mothers, stay-at-home mothers, and unhoused mothers. The grieving mothers, those who grieve their mothers, and those whose grief is complex. For all the communities that mother, and for all who depend on the Great Mother, you are held and beloved.
Now, our song today, number 360 in the gray hymnal, Forrest is going to lead us in Here We Have Gathered. to bring Russ Funk up, and he will lead us in our silence and meditation.
Good morning. As we get centered for the service this morning, I invite you to center as the way that I understand centering. In this time as progressives, we find ourselves, I think, very often leaning forward, particularly from Kentucky, where we're trying to lean into move us forward as a state. And in this time of Zoom, I find that we lean in even more. I certainly do, as if I'm trying to break that two-dimensional barrier to reach the person within. What happens when we lean in like that is we often lean in and curl our shoulders. And that does two detrimental things to our centering process. It cuts off our lung system and makes our breathing less effective, and it shuts down our heart system. What is the purpose of our breathing? The purpose of our breathing is to breathe out toxicity and breathe in nurturance. And we can't do that effectively if we're curled in. And not only is our heart necessary, obviously, for pumping blood, but in a lot of ways, our heart is also where our compassion, our friendship, our ability to love each other resides. And again, we can't be as effective as we want to be when we're curled in and leaned over. So I invite you to center. And what I mean by center is sitting in your chair so that I am in church, so your hips are squarely on the chair. Your back is lined up and your shoulders are squarely over your hips. Your head is aligned and squarely over your neck. Your chest is open. Your heart space is free. And welcome.
Number 594 in the hymnal, along with a piece of paper that you were given out.
Principles and purposes for all of us, or things maybe our moms taught us. I'll read the bold, you read the italics, please. We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations.
We affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. We affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We affirm and promote the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. We affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. We affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Might we affirm and promote journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. And we will see next week.
Yes, so please, everybody mark their calendar and please make sure that you can be here, and there are ballots actually available outside. Are they out on the... Oh, Michelle will talk about that a little bit later to make sure everybody knows. Today, we're going to have Russ Funk, who led us very nicely in our meditative practice. Russ Funk, and this is where I know him from, is the coordinator of the Kentucky UU Justice Action Network. And you may not know it by that long, but you have heard a variety of us talk about Kujan. And as the coordinator of Kujan, Russ Irvin Funk, I have to make sure I get his full name in there, helps to facilitate the development of our statewide efforts to advance justice. I also should mention, and I think equally important, Russ is also the justice coordinator for the All Peoples, who, as a matter of fact, is responsible for getting Kujan started and has been a leader in this, and he works for the Justice Center. So he has two hats that he wears. Russ lives in Louisville with his partner and their 12-year-old child and a cat who apparently belongs to himself. He loves camping and hiking and photography, gardening and writing. And today he's going to talk about Mother's Day and what that means. Thank you, Russ. Please come.
Thank you all again for inviting me. Those of you who don't know much, you should know that your little congregation here has really, many of the leaders of Kujan come from this congregation, disproportionately to the other congregations in the state. So it's really exciting when Diane invited me to come and be here for the day. So, and I love your campus. It's absolutely beautiful here. So today is Mother's Day, and being my mother's son, I thought it important that I honor her and honor mothers. I also would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that my child's mother, my partner, is at home celebrating Mother's Day without me today. She was quite okay with me having this off. I'm like, okay, go ahead. I'll have the day with Kiernan. See you when you get back. As you may know, the original Mother's Day was not a day of cards and flowers. It was a call to justice. It was a call to peace. And my mom, being who she was, I feel that particularly important to honor her and the way that she lived her life answering that call and then has transmitted that call down to us. My mom was born and raised in South Texas, dirt poor, the second of originally 5, then 4 children by the time she was 12. She spent most of her life in poverty, most of her coming up years in poverty in a harsh territory. South Texas is not a place for the weak of heart, or the weak of skin, for that matter. And her family life was not gentle. Her dad, my granddaddy, and I have permission to share these parts of her story, her dad was an alcoholic, and one of those alcoholics that was not only violent when he was drunk, he was also violent when he wasn't drunk. She says of herself as a child and young woman, "I was pretty much afraid of my own shadow." She left home as soon as she could, went to nursing school in San Antonio, and that is where she met my father. The first time she brought my dad home, to her home, to meet her parents, my peepaw met him at the door with a shotgun. Mom married Dad anyway. She became a nurse, and within 9 months of their marriage, they were counting the days. My brother arrived. I am the second of 3 kids, although there was a child between my brother and me who was a stillbirth. Betty, my mom, was not a feminist when she married my dad. By the time I was in high school, she was, I don't know that she would call herself a raging feminist, but pretty damn close. As a side note, I think it's fair to say that my dad did not marry a feminist and did not then know how to be married to a feminist. To this day, he does not know how to be married to a feminist, and yet he's still married to my mom, so appropriate kudos to him. This transformation of my mom between my elementary school days and my high school days is a time when any of you who are parents know the kids are watching. The kids are paying attention. And so as a child in those ages when my mom was becoming a feminist, I was watching. Not necessarily consciously, just like your kids weren't, just like my child doesn't necessarily consciously pay attention. In fact, if you ask him, he will tell you, quite frankly, no, I'm not paying attention to y'all. But they are anyway. And so my mother's growing and the lessons that she taught, both intentionally and not, landed squarely on my shoulders. One of the lessons that I learned from my mother was that you always leave a place better than you found it. Whether that's the apartment you rented, the home that you purchased, or the community that you live in. You leave the place better than you found it. When I was a child, one of my mom's roles in the community was as a sexuality educator. Now, this was before Planned Parenthood, at least in South Texas. And I remember a lot of times when the classroom was my parents' living room. And so we would have dinner, and depending on the topic, we would either be allowed to stay kind of in the room or be shuffled upstairs. But I do remember times when we would have guests come over, and I remember one of the classes in particular where the lesson was to come to my parents' house for the sexuality education class and cross-dress. And experience, what was that like? What does that mean if you were raised to be male and come into our parents' home with a skirt? Or if you were a female, raised to be female, to come into our parents' house with a suit and tie. Another lesson that they had that I remember fondly was going to a local strip club and interviewing and actually engaging in conversation with a stripper before going to the strip club. And for the men, asking the question of how does that change your experience of seeing the performance? They didn't invite us to the strip club, obviously, but the stories were there. My parents were also active in the community, which meant my dad, frequently with little or no notice, would bring interesting people home. That included gay and lesbian partners in our household, Gray Panthers, if for any of you who remember the Gray Panthers movement, Black Panthers, American Indian movement members. And the cardinal rule in my family's house, in my parents' house, was if my mother and dad brought someone home to dinner, you will respect them. Now, being kids, I don't know that they needed to say that. These were interesting people. It's like, cool, you're my parent. You know my parents, all right. Tell us about yourselves. And I think that cardinal rule that they invested in us sounds very, very similar to what I later learned to be the first principle of UUism. I should note that my father, before going to social work school, went to Lutheran ministry, and my mother grew up, being a good South Texas girl, grew up Southern Baptist. So somehow they got out of the Southern Baptism and conservative Missouri Synod Lutheranism, somehow they got the first principle dead on. While I was in high school, my mom worked to launch the domestic violence shelter in our town that served the town I grew up in and the two rural counties next to that. This was also while she was raising two of the three of us. My brother had left the house by then, being a full-time nurse in the VA system. She continued this activism throughout my high school and while I went into college. She did not share a lot of the stories of this, but one of the stories that she did share is how the sheriff and the other leaders of the city blamed her and her activism for the problem of domestic violence. This wasn't a problem until you started talking about it. After Betty retired from her paid work, she continued and in many ways expanded her life's work. After she retired as a nurse, she and my dad would travel around the backcountry roads of South Texas, finding, as my mom would say then, the old people. The folks who would live, as an example, one of my neighbors that I didn't even know lived there. My parents had a 40-acre ranch. Back at the end of that country road, which was about 3 miles long, lived an old woman whose children all had moved to San Antonio. Her feet were so crippled by arthritis that she actually walked on their sides. She had no vehicle. She lived 2.5 miles past this dirt country road, barely, a driveway really, and had no one to visit her. And occasionally her kids would show up, but this was before we had, anything like, at least in those counties, anything like an elder care service that would drop off food and just check in with people. So my parents went around the countryside adopting these old people. About 15 years ago, my parents moved from South Texas up to my sister's in northern Indiana. Not long after they moved, my mom, who was in her 70s at that point, had early onset Parkinson's and diabetes and heart disease and high blood pressure, continued to serve the quote-unquote old people in her community by cooking at the daycare center for the old folks, fixing dinners 3 days a week, and just being a friend. She also took up beekeeping and oil painting, and of course continued her gardening. Thankfully, she has survived COVID and the pandemic. Most of her activism has shut way down, although she is anxious for the opportunity to get back into town. She's in her early 80s. The Parkinson's has taken a firmer hold of her. She walks just about every day, paints most days. She had to give up her bees last year. But she's still living with a capital L. To this day, much to the chagrin of my dad and my sister, she will climb into bin, her front loader, when she feels the need to move a load of compost or whatever into her garden. Reflecting back on my mom's life, my mom had every reason, once she escaped her childhood home and found a man who keep her safe, she had every reason to stay home, raise the kids, and live a life, except if you ask her. According to my mom, she had every reason to give back. One of the other lessons that I learned from my mom is that we all have a responsibility to give back to the degree that we've been blessed. And what she didn't teach us was that caveat is somewhat dangerous, because A, you can't really give back to the degree that you've been blessed. The blessings are always greater than my ability anyway. Let me claim my own flaws. The blessings are always greater than my ability to give back, and the more I give back, what happens? My blessings get magnified and multiplied. So I'm always sliding down on that scale, right? Giving back to the way you've been blessed. But thank you, Mom. Here's some of the others I've learned. Here are some of the other lessons I've learned from my mom in the way that she lived this call for justice. We've heard a lot about self-care the past couple of years, right? And the need for us to take care of ourselves in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of the racial uprising, in the midst of everything that's going around in the world. The way my mother mothered, this lesson of self-care is in the context of collective care. Of course, mothering, regardless of the gender of who is doing it, requires sacrifice. But caring for myself and caring for my child, for my partner, for my community, for my congregation, does not necessarily require that I give up one to do the other. These different expressions of caring, at least the way my mother mothered, was intertangled and interwoven. There is, in fact, a thin line between self-care, self-servingness, self-centeredness, and selfishness. And the way my mother mothered, this call for justice requires that we center ourselves in the collective as we think about caring for ourselves. Another lesson I got from my mom is that mothering is not only about raising our children. Mothering is also about creating environments in which our children can thrive. And sometimes and often that environment is outside the doors of our homes. And put it another way, a part of our job in mothering includes making the world a better place for our children. And again, leaving this place better than we found it. The way my mom practiced and practices mothering is heavy on the idea of accountability, which I rely on as I consider practicing the eighth principle in my own life. Acting accountably, as my mother practiced it and as I saw it, means basically 5 things. Say what you're going to do with some reasoning behind why you're doing that. Do what you say you're going to do. Acknowledge when you can't or don't do what you said you were going to do. Take responsibility for the impact, the intended and unintended impacts, the beneficial and the harmful impacts of our actions, and make amends when necessary, which is nearly always, because there's almost always unintended consequences. Again, relying on her experience of mothering, she did the best she could as a mother. She raised 3 healthy children. Well, the healthiness is a judgment call. I'll leave that up to you all to decide. And she's mothering from the context of some significant flaws in who she is and how she was raised. And so some of those flaws got passed down generation by generation. We know how trauma works, right? The trauma that she had is not just inside her body. She passed down some of the trauma to her children. There's some unintended consequences when we mother, whatever the gender is of the person who is mothering. And part of being accountable means we make amends even when we have those unintended consequences, and those unintended consequences are harmful. Mothering, the way I saw and see it practiced, is inherently about justice seeking. It's about relationship building, it's about proactive caring, it's about making connections, it's about advocating for our children, and very often for ourselves. It's about being and holding others accountable. It's about organizing. Any of you who are mothers know there's a lot of organizing going on all the time in terms of mothering. And then there's a host of other expressions of activism that are built into what it means to mother. I am blessed to have a mother who transparently expressed many of these ideals in her life, and she continues to. She took her mothering out of the home and into the streets and into the communities and into the towns in which we lived. In this way, I suggest to you that mothering is not gendered. We all have the ability and the innate capacity to mother, and to mother for justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russ, for that. We enjoy Texas. I didn't know that. Let us, if anybody should have any questions or would like to talk about Russ's coming from Texas or from any of the things that he has brought up, which I think I certainly was reflecting on as he's talking about, please join us all in the fellowship hall next door. There are refreshments and conversation and opportunities to explore UU activism and what could you ask for on that. We now will be looking for the collection on our offertory. Most of the time, this congregation and the work that we do is supported by voluntary generosity of all who contribute, both in terms of their time and their money and of their values. And this offering we consider to be a sacrament of the free church. So you may place your donations in the baskets by each of the door, or we have on the board, you can contact your PayPal, you can do it with the Cash App. You can certainly send your, this doesn't work out, you can certainly leave or send donations in at our address here. And if you have any other kinds of things, you can also follow up. If you're not sure about this, you can check about at our website on the donation page. And so as we enjoy music, which Forrest will be playing, we want you to think about what you can offer, and we receive it most gratefully. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for gifts, both, as I said, as far as in terms of time, in terms of money, and in terms of the service. May we use these all wisely in our congregation and our community. And before we go on any further, As you know, our services are lay-led, so there are a lot of people that are very much involved in this, and I'd like to give a chance to thank everybody who is here. Matt Hazel, who did do help, he's not here today, but he has been amply helped. And our backstage, the person who's pulling the strings back there is Michelle. Michelle, you stick your head out so people can acknowledge you. And we really appreciate all this, as well as Forrest playing on through this. Before we go on, let us actually have, we have a little bit of information for community news, and I know Michelle has some things to tell us. Please come.
Good morning. Florian is also helping me backstage, so give him a shout out when he comes out. So this is the season of voting, and we love democracy around here most of the time. We want to let you know you may have gotten one of these cards in the mail. Mine was significantly smudged, so just in case you couldn't read yours, we thought we'd make it a plea here. So we have in-person voting this time on May the 12th, 13th, and 14th of 2022. And those places, we're having regional spots, not the old elementary school or the fire station or wherever you went last time. Probably not the same this time. Ephraim White Park, Living Hope Baptist Church, Michael Buchanan Park, Fillmore Park, and Sugar Maple Square. On the day, which is May 17th, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., there's voting at those places and more. The new Cumberland Trace Elementary, Warren Central High School, and the Warren County Cooperative Extension. So we hope that doesn't throw too many people. I know in my district, we never knew where we were voting, so maybe we'll get used to this. And here in our church, next Sunday, we will have our congregational meeting, and we will be voting for the new board of directors and the endowment committee, and whether we will be an early adopter or of the 8th principle. So the ballot will look like this. If you can't join us next week, and I hope you can, because there's going to be beautiful music, and there's going to be pizza lunch, and it'll just be a good time to be together. But if you can't make it, please see Diane. She has a ballot you can take home. It has instructions, and we want your voice to be heard. Thank you.
And I think one other thing, Sharon over here is selling tickets. She's selling tickets so that if you decide that you want to park right in front of the parking lot, in front of the door, you can have a chance to win that. And the tickets are, what are the prices on the tickets? And the money is actually is coming back to the church, so it will be very much appreciated, but it is a chance for you to arrange that. Also, if you have any questions about the Unitarian Universalism, or about joining the congregation, we would like you to speak to members of the membership team. Do we have anybody here? We have Sharon and we have Nancy back here, and you can speak with them, or you can send a message to our board president, Christine Kruger, and you can reach her at president at uubgky.org. And we are going to have our last hymn, and Forrest will be playing that. It is hymn 191, Now I Recall My Childhood. going to be done by Lisa Del Porto. Please come up.
Hello. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to see so many people here today. I'm going to read to you this proclamation written in 1870 for Mother's Peace Day by Julia Ward Howe. You may know that name. She's the author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Move forward 152 years to now, where we have a war in Europe devastating an entire country and its people, and in the U.S., a Supreme Court decision looming, which would relegate women to chattel. It seems appropriate to hear again. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or of tears. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure others. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession. As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of counsel. Let them meet first as women to bewail and commemorate the dead. Let them then solemnly take counsel with each other as to the means whereby the great human family can live in peace, each learning after his own time the sacred impress, not of Caesar, but of God. In the name of womanhood and of humanity, I earnestly ask that a General Congress of Women without limit of nationality may be appointed and held at some place deemed most convenient and at the earliest period consistent with its objects, to promote the alliance of the different nationalities, the amicable settlement of international questions, the great and general interest of peace.
We have reached the point in our service where our people who are online will be leaving us. And we bid farewell to all of you who have joined us online. And we hope that you found this service meaningful, and we invite you to join us again. Be well and go in peace. Our community is strengthened by sharing with each other. If you are here for the first or second time and you wish, please tell us your name and a little bit about yourself, or you can tell us your name and briefly tell us what's on your hearts and mind. While we're getting that